Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. My name is Noah. I live alone in the serene countryside, working as a cattle rancher and livestock farmer. Life had been peaceful until a group of real estate bigwigs bought a nearby patch of farmland and transformed it into a suburban neighborhood called New Alexandria. At first, I resisted the invasion of privacy that came with new neighbors, but I eventually adjusted to the idea. Little did I know that the Homeowners Association of New Alexandria would become the source of my troubles. The first encounter with the local Homeowners Association was amicable. Glenn, the newly elected president, approached me one summer morning while I was working in the barn. Despite his wheezes and pauses, our conversation flowed smoothly. His visit actually warmed me up to the idea of having friendly faces nearby. However, things took a turn when Glenn approached me with an offer to buy my land for Homeowners Association expansion. Although the cash settlement was tempting, I cherished my life in the countryside and declined his offer. Glenn's reaction was startling. He seemed personally offended by my refusal. His subsequent attempts to convince me only deepened our animosity. As families started moving into the neighborhood, their children grew fond of my horses. I often rode through the streets, bringing smiles to their faces, but Glenn despised horses with an inexplicable passion. One morning as I rode down the street, he exploded in a fit of rage, shouting and waving his arms like a madman. I barked back, trying to calm both him and my horse, but the commotion made my steed restless. Glenn hurriedly retreated indoors, leaving me perplexed. Later that evening, 3 knocks at my front door startled me from my sleep. I cautiously approached, gripping my shotgun for security. To my surprise, it was a police officer, a visit triggered by Glenn's relentless complaints. Though no crime had been committed, the officer left with a polite warning. It was evident that Glenn wasn't pleased with the outcome. A few days later, I received a suspicious notice from the Homeowners Association offices, a phony restraining order preventing me from riding my horse on Homeowners Association-owned land. Furious, I tore it up and discarded the remnants without a second thought. Glenn underestimated my knowledge of the law and assumed he could intimidate me easily. Instead of retaliating immediately, I decided to bide my time, allowing Glenn to revel in his perceived victory. After a few days, I returned to the neighborhood on horseback, ignoring his warnings. As I approached, Glenn's face contorted with shock, horror, and rage. He brandished a shotgun, threatening me with violence if I didn't leave the Homeowners Association property immediately. Panic erupted around us. Children cried, and my horse grew increasingly uneasy. Before I could assess my options, Glenn fired a shot, narrowly missing me and nearly unseating me from my mount. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I leaped from the horse and sprinted towards him. A well-placed punch sent Glenn crashing to the ground, unconscious. I quickly checked myself for injuries and, thankfully, found none. Unfortunately, my horse succumbed to its injuries. The chaos attracted a convoy of police cars, which swiftly secured the area and assessed our conditions. Glenn was taken into custody, while I was advised to seek legal counsel. Following a weekend hiatus, the court proceedings began. Despite Glenn's high-strung attorney, the judge favored my plea. I offered Glenn a plea deal, sparing him jail time but obligating him to work on my farm as restitution. In the end, justice prevailed, teaching Glenn a valuable lesson: never mess with a farmer on his own turf. Update. Since the incident, New Alexandria has witnessed significant changes. The community rallied against Glenn's actions, questioning his suitability as Homeowners Association president. A special election was held, resulting in the election of a new president, Lucy, who advocated for better communication and respect among neighbors. The incident also spurred a re-evaluation of the Homeowners Association's rules and policies. Residents now enjoy more inclusive regulations, allowing for activities like horseback riding within specified guidelines. Additionally, an equestrian committee was established to promote understanding between horse owners and other residents. As for me, I continue to thrive as a cattle rancher and farmer, contributing to the community in my own way. The incident served as a catalyst for stronger bonds with my neighbors, who now appreciate the importance of preserving the harmonious coexistence between rural and suburban lifestyles. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Circa January 2020, my friend made a stupid decision and bought a brand new car he couldn't afford. His insurance was around $400 a month, while he made about $10.25 an hour working as a shift supervisor at McDonald's. His car payment amounted to $795 a month. Now, with a wage of $10.25 an hour for 30 hours a week, he earned approximately $300 a week, or about $1,230 a month. So yeah. My friend came to me for help because I used to sell cars and had good knowledge of the industry. I reviewed his paperwork. The dealer indeed took advantage of him, but my friend was seeking a way out of this mess. While the dealer overcharged him for the warranty, gave him a higher APR, and added extra fees, none of that was illegal. I knew that the only way to help my friend was if the dealer had done something illegal. I examined the finance application that my friend had signed, and I had a sudden realization. No bank would approve someone for a $795 car payment if they were only making $1,200 a month. It simply didn't make mathematical sense. So I started searching through his paperwork for the finance application that the dealer had submitted to the bank. Usually, when you submit a finance application at a dealership, they take the hand-filled application and reproduce it electronically, which is a common practice. However, on the application that the dealer had submitted to the bank, they stated that my friend was the general manager of McDonald's, earning $70,000. Since my friend had good credit, it seemed like the bank didn't ask for proof of income. I went to the dealership with my friend and informed the sales manager that he needed to put me in touch with the general manager because we were going to unwind my friend's deal and return his trade-in. The sales manager and the GM both thought I was joking. Then, I demonstrated how the dealership's finance department had committed bank fraud. I showed the GM the finance application my friend had filled out, and then I showed him the one the dealership had submitted to the bank, pointing out the income difference. My friend actually made $14,000 a year, but the dealership claimed he made $70,000 a year. That was bank fraud, a felony. The GM realized that his dealership was in deep trouble. The evidence I presented was rock solid, and we were all on the same page. He asked, "Okay, so what can I do to make this right?" I replied, "Unwind the deal and give my friend his trade-in back." Unwinding the deal meant that the GM agreed to cancel the deal and essentially erase it as if it never happened. The GM tried to avoid it, but I stood firm and reminded him that we could easily take this documentation and make his life a living hell. He knew I was right. Besides, my friend needed a car to get to work the next day. The GM said he would look into it. When he returned, he unfortunately informed me that they had already sold my friend's trade-in. I said, "That's fine, unwind the deal, and let's put my friend into something as good or slightly better than what he traded in for." The GM asked, "So he'll buy a car similar to his trade-in?" I replied, "No, you'll give him a car similar to his trade-in." The GM responded, "It doesn't work that way." I told him, "It does when you commit bank fraud." The GM was upset with me, but I reminded him that I was being nice and things could get really ugly in this situation. Felony-level charges ugly, franchise losing ugly. So yeah, this is going to hurt, but it will hurt less if we do it my way. Reluctantly, the GM agreed and checked his inventory. He told me they had a 2007 Focus with 10,000 more miles. I said, "No, the car you give my friend needs to be the same or better than what he traded in." The GM countered, "I'm giving him a free car." I replied, "No, you took his trade-in, sold it, made money on that sale, and committed a felony in the process of selling him his new car. Now you're correcting that mistake. This isn't a free car for my friend. This is you correcting your mistake." The GM insisted that was all he was willing to do. I told him that if he couldn't do better than that, we would consult a consumer protection attorney and have a conversation with them. My friend didn't want to go down that route, but it was our plan B. Just as we were about to leave, the GM said, "Wait, give me a second." He returned and said, "I have an 08 Civic with 5,000 more miles. It's a Civic and not a Focus, but I can unwind the deal on the new car and put your friend in the Civic at no extra cost." We agreed. The GM had the paperwork drawn up. The old loan on the new car was canceled. They took back the new car, though they would have to sell it as used since it was already titled, which sucked for them, and they gave my friend a better car than the one he traded in. For those wondering why we didn't involve a lawyer from the start, we could have done that. However, courts take a long time, and this was a faster way to fix the situation. The next one is a petty revenge story. It was Christmas time, and the mall parking lot was jammed. Somehow, I lucked into a space near an entrance, and 4 hours later, my friend Dawn and I staggered back to my car with full arms and very sore feet. But we'd be home in half an hour, so the end was in sight. We got the bags stowed, and we buckled in, laughing ruefully about how exhausted we were. As I began backing out, a car was slowly pulling past right behind me. Naturally, I braked to wait for the car to clear my spot, but the driver saw my brake lights and realized she'd lucked out. All she had to do was back up and let me out, and my primo spot would be hers. But it couldn't be that easy. Another car was tight on her tail, and that driver wanted my spot too. And neither one of them was budging. The two drivers' faces got redder and redder as they honked, revved their engines to make the other driver think they were going to plow right into their car if it didn't move, and in general made utter asses of themselves over the parking spot. Meanwhile, my friend and I were trapped and getting pretty mad ourselves. After more than 5 minutes of this craziness, motor running but going nowhere, Dawn and I had had enough. We looked at each other and smiled. Then we got out of the car, locked it back up, and waved at the two disbelieving parking warriors as we headed back into the mall for a much-needed drink and a bite to eat. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So, my best friend loves it every time I tell this story. So I thought I would share it with all of you. In high school, I had an AP English teacher who was very opinionated in her grading. If she loved a book that the class had to read and you didn't, you wouldn't get a good grade on your report when you turned it in. I was an avid reader. In fact, I cleaned out my school library in 3rd grade. So let's just say I wasn't a fan of her literary selections. She was also the kind of teacher who thought her class was the most important one you had. Due to this, the workload was quite substantial. Coming up on our final exam, she gave the class a talk 1 week before the final. She would be weighting our grade for the semester, giving 60% of it to the final. She explained she was preparing us for college. However, since she was giving so much weight to the final, she would give us an opportunity to earn extra credit. For every 4 lines of the epic poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, that you could memorize and write verbatim on the back of the test, you would receive 1 point of extra credit. Goody goody hands time. I had a rough year due to her grading style, so I was getting a B in the class at the time. However, this was my moment to shine. I have a knack for remembering things. In fact, as a freshman, I learned all the lines for the lead role of Neil Simon's Rumors, 2 hours before opening night, due to the lead dropping out. I then performed the role for 3 nights without dropping a line. So this opportunity seemed made for me, and I wasn't going to let it pass by. I got home and looked up the poem. It was well over 400 lines. I got to work. The final exam finally came. I sat down confidently in my seat and eagerly waited to receive my test. We received our 15-page final and were told we had 3.5 hours to complete it. I put my name at the top and immediately flipped it over to the back. For the next 8 minutes, I ravenously wrote out 400 straight lines from the epic poem verbatim. With that step complete, I decided to look at the questions she intended for us to answer. It was filled with multiple-choice essays and fill-in-the-blank questions. I took a few minutes to fill in the blanks I knew, guessed at the multiple-choice ones I didn't know, and completely ignored her biased essays. Now for the fun part. After a grueling 15 minutes, a total of 3.5 hours for the final, I walked triumphantly to the teacher's desk. I flipped the test onto her desk and said, "Have a great summer." She said, "Very funny, it's a 3.5-hour final. Sit down and finish your test." I responded, "No, I'm finished. I got over 100%. She said, "Let me see your paper." She looked through my test. She saw the empty essays and empty fill-in-the-blanks. Now, even more annoyed with me, she said, "You haven't answered half of these. It's a 3.5-hour final. Sit down and finish your test." I wouldn't be denied. I said, "No, I'm finished. I got over 100%. At this point, she was getting very upset, and the color in her face was starting to shift. "How do you think you have over 100% when you haven't done half the test?" she demanded. With a big smile, I said, "Look at the back. You said for every 4 lines of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner we memorized and wrote on the back, we would get 1 point of extra credit. You will notice I have written 400 lines from the poem. By my math, that equals 100% of extra credit. Anything I answered in this nonsense is gravy, so I got over 100%. She turned beet red. Her knuckles were white, holding my paper, and she stared at me with hate in her eyes. I said, "Have a great summer," as I walked out feeling like I had just dropped Mike Tyson with a single blow. I got an A in the class. My final was 145% out of 100. The next one is an entitled people story. So, a few years ago, I was teaching at a private urban religious college. Since I only had my MS, I was thankful for the opportunity to teach and gain experience before pursuing my PhD. The school usually had me teach accelerated night courses, which were aimed at non-traditional learners. Read, adults returning to school after many years off. I loved my students and had a blast teaching them. I had some issues with a few students here and there, but generally my experiences were really positive. But there was this one couple. Let's call them Hannah and Larry. That semester, I had been asked to cover a more traditional course at the last minute. Instead of being accelerated, it met 3 times a week, for an hour, throughout the semester. Furthermore, the class was very small, only about 4 students. Normally, small classes can be great, and a paycheck is a paycheck. But it was challenging due to Hannah and Larry. You see, this couple had attendance issues, to put it mildly. They would show up to a class or two and then vanish for a week or more without any word. Just when I suspected they were gone for good, they would show up, usually with some excuse or another, medical issues, car problems, work, etc. At first I tried to be sympathetic. I always have the attitude that life happens and sometimes things get tough. But at a certain point I began to grow suspicious that they were making up stories. Okay, I was immediately suspicious, but I usually let things slide to a certain point, just like my professors did for me. This was worse because of the small size of the class. Every time I prepared for a session, assuming all 4 would be present, they would skip and disrupt my plans. But when I accepted that they would be absent and prepared activities for 2 students, they would show up. All of this would be frustrating, but acceptable if it weren't for 2 things. First, whenever they showed up, these 2 would have an attitude and expect everyone to conform to their presence and cater to their demands. Second, they, of course, weren't doing any of the work. These 2 factors reached a breaking point when Hannah, who was the louder and more confident of the 2, would almost demand extensions and the ability to submit late work. I would give them the extensions, only for both her and Larry to ignore the work again. I like to be accommodating to my students within reason, but it quickly became obvious that Hannah thought she was playing me and could get whatever she wanted. And that couldn't stand. I have some level of pride and hate being seen as a pushover. Now I could have immediately put my foot down and said, "No more late work." But I was sure Hannah would throw a fit and go to the administration. I knew the administration would back me up, but I didn't want the hassle. I was working on a second MS at this point and had 2 other jobs. I was extremely busy and hadn't even planned on teaching that semester. I only agreed because they needed me. Besides, I'm an easygoing guy, but I do have my limits. I was angry at this point, but I also have a wicked, to me, sense of humor. Hannah wanted to think she had me wrapped around her finger. Okay, let her think that. I was going to give her enough rope to hang herself. So for the past few weeks, whenever she asked for an extension, I would smile and say sure. Then I would chuckle when nothing came in. Every time I wrote her and Larry emails, reminding them of the new due date. Getting things in writing is key, kids. And then we reached the final exam. I hadn't seen the duo in a few sessions and was actually surprised to see them stumble in to take the test. They failed, of course. But what can you do? Hannah approached me in front of the class and asked for another extension. I put on my best teacher voice and expressed my disappointment. However, I said it was fine, as life happens. But I made it clear that I was posting grades the next weekend, and the absolute latest I would accept any late work was Friday at 11:59 p.m. Once it hit midnight, my books were closed. I asked if they both understood, and they showed a bit of solemnity when they assured me that they did. Good. I confirmed it in an email, and then sat back to grade the finals over the week. I mean, there were only 4 exams. It wasn't that much work. I knew there was a risk they would follow through, and I would end up with a semester's worth of work to grade. However, I was feeling pretty confident that wasn't going to happen at this point. Friday night arrived. I didn't work my other jobs that day, and my own schoolwork was done, so I decided to buy a few beers and relax by playing some video games. At a certain point, I glanced down and realized it was midnight. I opened my email and reminded everyone that the books were now closed. If I give an extension, it's open to the whole class. I'm not playing favorites, not that anyone else needed it. I cracked open another beer, let out my best supervillain laugh, and went back to my game. Sunday came, and I was posting the final grades for the semester. I usually hate failing students, but I admit I had a smile on my face as I assigned Hannah and Larry their well-deserved Fs. 10 minutes after I hit save for the grades, I heard the familiar ba-ding of my email going off, followed by another. Now who could this be? It was, of course, Hannah and Larry. Larry's email could best be summarized as, "Oh my God, didn't you get my email with the work? I sent it on Friday." Hannah's email said the exact same thing. It was obvious they were thinking they could get another day or two by claiming they had sent the work. After all, hadn't I been so accommodating and gullible all semester? Oh, the fools, the fools. They played right into my hands, and this was the moment I had been waiting for. I double-checked to make sure I hadn't missed emails from them, just to be safe. Ooh, I hadn't. And then I typed my response. "No, I didn't, and I just double-checked after your last message. That's okay. Emails sometimes get lost." At this point, I like to imagine Larry smiling while reading this. He had won again. God, this professor is an idiot. I continued. "So, what I'm going to need you to do is go back into the email you sent me with the work. Just take a screenshot which has the timestamp of the email and forward that to me along with the work. That'll prove you sent it on time." I then responded to Hannah's email, saying the same thing. What was their response? Did their eyes widen as they realized they had been held accountable for their actions? Did panic set in? Were there tears? Howls of regret? The gnashing of teeth and rending of hair? Sadly, I'll never know. I never heard from them again. They didn't even bother making another attempt. And me? Well, I decided to buy some more beer that night to celebrate once again. Occasionally, I'll tell my current students the tale, a humorous reminder that 1, yes, I'm accommodating, 2, yes, I'm pretty laid back, but 3, I'm not an idiot and don't try to play me. It usually gets a good laugh, and if some of those laughs sound a wee bit nervous, all the better. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.